Kia ora everybody and welcome back to another episode of Untidy. My name is Hannah Davison. I'm a mother of two, cat hostage to two, dog mother to one. I'm the co-founder and author of the My Big Moments children's books, the books that help your little people through the first big moments in their life. And I'm here with my very busy and important co-host who has a job.
Yes, I'm Matilda Green, current maternity leave coverer of radio and mother to three. And today on the show, we're thrilled to be joined by a trailblazer in the world of exercise physiology and sports nutrition, Dr. Stacy Sims. Stacy is an internationally renowned scientist and has made it her mission to revolutionize how women train, eat, and perform to support female athletes and women's health across the board. Stacy is also the author of the best-selling book, Raw. And you've probably seen her viral TED talk, Women Are Not Small Men, which is just such a brilliant title. She's published over 100 peer-reviewed papers and is regularly called on to speak as an authority on women's health and supporting female athletic performance through her extensive research in sports science. Dr. Sims holds a senior research associate position at the AUT Sports Performance Research Institute of New Zealand and releases courses to support women and girls in sport through her online learning platform at drstacysims.com. So we're absolutely thrilled to have you join us on the show today. Welcome, Stacy.
Thanks. And I always hear that and I'm like, wait, no, I'm Jara's mom and I'm Tama's he's my fur baby. So what does that make me, a fur mom?
A fur mum. Sure. Yeah, I think so. Okay,
that works.
I know. It's amazing when you hear all of the things that you do and you're like, I do those things? God,
I know.
Like a very
who
busy
is that
woman.
person?
Yeah. Stacey, before we get into it, we've seen you sharing your knowledge all over social media and on some of the biggest podcasts worldwide. And it's so exciting to see you bringing women's sports science to the world stage. But was there a breakthrough moment for you in becoming so sought after as the authority on the topic?
No, I don't think so. I think people have pushed back a lot. And so finally it started resonating because I've always been the one who has been on the fringes going, well, why is that? That doesn't seem right for us. And I think after 20 some years of saying it, people finally sat up and started listening. I think the most recent big break was the Huberman podcast. And we had Stanford connections. And when I got there chatting with the crew, we had all gone to high school together. So it was like, oh,
wow.
family. So it made the podcast a little bit easier because you kind of had that kind of interaction. And then from there,
at the start.
Kind of went up from there. Yeah.
Yeah, God, that is amazing. So 20-something years, is that all it took before people started paying attention?
Yeah, maybe a bit more. I feel like I'm the parent in the sports science field going, and this and this and this and this. You know how kids never listen until they get older? And I feel like now it's grown up enough where they're like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, we had a neuroscientist on the podcast a while ago, and Dr. Sarah Mackay, and she said exactly the same thing. She was like, I've been talking about this for so long, and only now are we starting to talk about women's brains.
Right. I know. Yeah. It's frustrating, but we're talking now.
Exactly.
Here we are. And seeing as I've learned from listening to you that women really are built for endurance, clearly you've demonstrated that. You've demonstrated the point and just actually getting this information across. I also was curious to know, before we ask you the questions about why we're here today, how did you come to live in Aotearoa?
Back at the very end of the 90s, so 1999, I landed in New Zealand for a job. And then, so I was in Wellington working, and I was working at Massey, and there was the press to get a PhD. So looking between going back to the States or studying at Otago, and there was an environmental lab down in Dunedin, and I wanted to look at environmental stress. So I got accepted to the PhD program and went down there. And that's where I met my husband because he was my supervisor's best friend. And my husband is from Matamata, and we moved back to California for almost 10 years and had a daughter, and looking at the surroundings of the stress of childhood in San Francisco Bay Area. And a job came up here at the Mount to work for University of Waikato. And I got that job and we moved back. And then COVID hit and all that stuff. So, we're here.
And here you are. The Mount is not a bad place to land.
It's beautiful. Now, we're really excited to talk to you today about something that we've been asked to do an episode on by our listeners, and that is how to support and guide our young women through puberty and adolescence. So we want to look at this from a few different angles, and fortunately, you have just released a new course called NextGen through your website. So could you tell us a bit about what that course is and why you wanted to develop it?
Yeah, I feel like people can see my passions when they look at my books and courses. It's like when Roar came out, I was just retiring as a professional athlete and wanted to help coaches. And then the conversation about menopause came up from one chapter in that. And I started seeing my friends and my age group. And now our kids are growing up. And I have always seen the discrepancy in sport between the opportunities and the funding and the coaching and the knowledge for boys and men in sport versus what girls have. I mean, it was really apparent when I was on the professional scene cycling, where all of us women who were racing had to have jobs. And then the men were like, yeah, whatever, we're just racing. So as my daughter is growing up and is into soccer and surfing and has all the questions, and we look at what the coaching is and the coaching environments, especially when you're looking at how the boys and the girls are playing, it's still really apparent that there's that discrepancy where we're still trying to apply the mentality of what works for boys to girls. We see, like boys really thrive on aggression and one-on-one, where girls are more team oriented and they don't want to be put in the spotlight. We also see the changes that the bodies are going through, where, boys get leaner and stronger and fitter and faster, and girls go through this period where their bodies completely change from biomechanics and center of gravity and body comp and become very ungangly, and no one guides them through it. So I get really frustrated that people are like, oh, well, girls just drop out of sport because they become disinterested. It's like, oh, no. They don't drop out of sport and physical activity because they become disinterested. They drop out because they don't feel comfortable. They don't know what's going on. They don't feel comfortable in their bodies. They don't feel comfortable in the environment. They feel like they're being spotlit. And then when they start expressing all of these things and the mood changes and not understanding what's going on, they get gaslit because it's coming from a male perspective. So I get very frustrated with that. And I have been frustrated all the way through. But now I'm like, you know what? I've had enough of the platform to be able to talk about us as older women. Now I want to leverage that platform to help on the very start of it all, so that my daughter doesn't have to go through all the crap that I've gone through, my friends have gone through. I don't like the diet culture, so I want to put a swell on that. There's so many things now where I can see if we put our hand in now and we start talking about how we can treat our girls differently and we can train them differently. We can work on functional movements, having them understand how their bodies are changing, reteach them how to run, throw, have enjoyment, body positivity. Then I feel like that can feed forward. And maybe in 2 generations, we have complete body positivity instead of all this negative. You need to be small, you need to be dainty, you need to not complain. And if you're going to be an athlete, you either have to be super aggressive like a man, or you need to just be grassroots. So that's my big passionate soapbox.
I love that so much, because I remember going through puberty and just kind of being left to it, right? Like we kind of had something in health class about what happens, and then we were just like, all right, figure it out yourself. And you're so right. It affects every part of your life, including how you participate in sport. So for this course, is it just for athletic girls and coaches, or can parents benefit from it too?
We designed it to have anyone from 15 older be able to get in there. So It can be for the girls, the coaches, the parents, caregivers, anyone who's interested in understanding puberty changes for girls, from the physiology to the mental to the sociocultural, how to interact with that. Yeah. So it's the whole thing.
Awesome.
Oh, that's so exciting. Wouldn't you just love it to be part of the curriculum for PE?
Yes,
I mean,
I would.
Science, like that would just be an absolute game changer. You mentioned you're a parent yourself to a daughter, and I think, is she like sort of on the cusp of adolescence now?
Yes, she's
Right.
12.
So,
She'll be 13 in June, so almost 13.
oh,
Yeah.
wow. God, oh, you nearly got a teenager. That's going to
Yeah.
happen to me this year too.
Ah.
I'm actually excited. I think it gets more and more fun. And
Yeah.
I want to keep that mentality as long as I can.
Yes.
So what challenges do you see coming for yourself as a parent through this next stage for your daughter?
Yeah, there's a lot of things where, because I've done so much in my life, I have a lot to draw from experience, but I'm mom, so that doesn't count. So trying to help her navigate that and say, you know what, you can talk to me because I've done everything. So if there's something you want to do, talk to me and maybe, we can navigate through it. I started something very early on when she was 6 or 7, where at night I would, we sit and we have conversations right before she goes to sleep. But instead of trying to fix something that was bothering her, I just let her vent. So we now have that. And so she feels safe to be able to just say whatever is going on. And there are no stupid questions, there's no judgment. So creating that safe environment, which I think helps now, because she's navigating like mean girls at school or what she looks like. And you have all the things from social media. And I'm also the mean mom that won't let her have a phone, because I'm trying to protect her from all that stuff as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But then when it comes down to like sport and body and all that kind of stuff, throughout her whole life, I've always pushed being strong. I've never talked about calories. I've never talked about the diet culture, but it's seeped in from friends. And so she'll come and say, well, so-and-so is so small and can do this and that. And I'm like, yeah, but how strong is she? Can she deadlift like you? Can she lift these things? Can she do this and that? How fast are you sprinting, jumping? So always bring it back to the physicality or how she feels.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very beneficial because now she's talking about that with her friends. I also sit in that unique position where the girls are all talking about periods and how their bodies are changing. And I don't know if this is a good thing or not, but her friends will ask her to ask me questions.
I love
Right.
that.
Oh,
It's
and
great.
then it is good because then she actually has to listen to your advice and then she has to say it back to someone else. And so she's going to remember.
Right. And I like that. But
Yeah.
I feel bad for the fact that the other girls can't ask their own moms.
Mm.
But at least they have someone they can go to.
Yeah.
Whereas we were navigating, didn't know anything. So we'd ask each other, right? And
It's just the blind leading the blind. None of us
right.
knew. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so you're starting to see your daughter face these challenges at school. What are the biggest challenges you're seeing that could kind of threaten her, her desire to continue to be active and stay strong?
Because we have all the differences in maturity, there are some girls that are more developed and a bit fitter or faster. So it's a little bit of I used to be this fast and now I'm not. And so there's a little bit of discrepancy. So trying to explain, look, these are all the things that are happening. Why you can't do pull-ups anymore. We have to practice doing pull-ups now. You just aren't naturally good at it because your center of gravity has changed. Your arms are longer, your legs are longer, but your muscles haven't quite caught up with that. So just trying to explain very practically what's happening. And she's like, okay, I get it. So it's a temporary thing. And once XYZ happens, then this. It's like, well, not really. It's a grading scale. So we see all these changes started happening when you're 8. Now you're really understanding what's going on because your body's changed so much, but we still haven't gotten through the other side. So we're looking at how are we going to functionally move and keep the positive aspects and bring the fun into it. So her coaches have asked, okay, well, I can't get them engaged. What's going on? It's like, you need to bring more fun into it. So the girls are now telling them like, yeah, we'll have a kickoff, but it's 2 of us, not 1 of us going up to the goal. So it's like trying to bring that fun into it. So now that she's bringing the fun into it, she actually thinks of everything as a game, not as a training situation, which again, when we bring more fun into things, it works.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That makes so much sense. Sometimes it feels like they're a professional athlete, right? At school, like some of the pressure that you can feel in those scenarios. And it's like, this is setting them up for a love of, like, that's what we're trying to do, is set them up for a love of being physically active and a love of sport.
Right.
And there's just too much pressure too early, I think.
Absolutely. And I mean, I see it all the time where you have the parents that are pushing the kids to excel and the kids burn out. Or the kids are really fantastic early puberty and then they hit this plateau and then all of a sudden they're not the best and they're not the fastest and the parents push and the kids get really demoted and just really negative and completely drop out. So I keep telling people it's not about specializing. It's about having every opportunity possible, finding what your kid loves, encouraging that, but also encouraging things like music and dance and playing outside and just free play and not being tied to any one particular thing because it creates burnout. And kids are like, we experience burnout when we're 20s, 30s, whatever. We don't need it now when we're in our teens or early teens, even that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've touched on the physical things that happen to girls in those teen years that can contribute to the dropout of sports. But you also talk about language that girls may be getting exposed to from others that might have an impact on how motivated they feel to stay in sport and activity. So can you give us an example of what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, we always default to the male as the norm, right? So if we're thinking about push-ups, we say girl push-ups, or instead of a modified push-up, or sissy squats. It's like, no, it's an air squat, right? So we're seeing all this negative language that gets implemented into the training and physical activity. We also see it in things like uniforms. The uniforms are just unisex, but they're really designed for the boy, and so they're not comfortable for the girl. And the colors as well. The colors aren't necessarily appropriate. Like, who wants to wear white shorts when you don't know when and if your period's going to come? And all of that is wrapped up in the way that we are approaching coaching. And we have to really be cognizant of the tonality of the language as well as the words. Because, like I said earlier, girls don't grab onto aggressive language. They want more of a positive environment. We also see that a lot of the hangover of what someone might have commented on their physical appearance can come into training. So we have to really be inclusive with the language that we're using, and we're not putting it on a particular throw or skill. We're like, okay, well, let's try this in a positive scope. Because if we start pushing the sissy squats, the girl push-ups, the ladies bar, and we're defaulting to you run like a girl, like all these negative connotations come with being a physically active girl, and it gets cemented in, then it's just that undercurrent of negativity that just festers in the subconscious that then comes forward. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not like the boys. I'm not good enough. And so instead of comparing, we have to look at how do we promote, and we use that positive language and say it's a modified push-up. We'll do some plyos against the wall. We're looking at air squats. We're looking at using a smaller bar for smaller hands. And we're looking at how we're jumping, how we're sprinting, all of these things in that positive language. And it really does resonate. We see girls light up when all of a sudden they're not being compared to, but they're looking at how these skills are and how fast they're moving now versus 3 weeks ago because of training implementation or feeling good about their bodies or feeling good about themselves.
Oh my God, it makes so much sense. And what are some of the most impactful biomechanical changes that really affect girls as they change through puberty?
Their whole body changes. Like, primarily center of gravity drops from being higher up to lower. So we're seeing an alteration in the way that they're carrying themselves. We also see a widening of the hips, and I guess we have a wider angle from the hip to the knee. So we see a predisposition to more knee injuries, ACL injuries. We see with that change of the hip to the knee and change of center of gravity becoming more quad dominant. So we're not using hamstrings, glutes, and posterior chain, which again accelerates and exacerbates low back issues and running mechanics. The shoulder girdle also widens to match the hips. So now throwing is off, swimming stroke is off. This is another reason why doing monkey bars is a bit of a miss, because you're not as narrow. So it's harder to pull and to swing that way with also the lower center of gravity. We also see that the limbs grow a lot faster than the muscle and ligaments can catch up. And so you have a disconnect where there is a center of gravity change, a weakening of the core, and a lengthening of the limbs. So all of this makes people feel like Phoebe running in Central Park, all crazy, right? And when you're at this time where the girls feel like they're the star of their own movie and everyone's watching them, then all of these changes that they don't understand really compounds that self-conscious and negative conversation they have in their head about how they are and how they fit in the world.
I didn't know about 90% of those. And I'm 34 years old and I still don't know what happened to me in puberty. So yeah, this is...
Yeah.
And so we hold that, right, as we're adults. So when I see people out rucking with a weight vest, women, where the weight is up in the chest area, I'm like, it's changing your biomechanics because our weight, center of weight isn't up there, it's lower.
Mm-hmm.
So we start to see a lot of soft tissue injuries because the biomechanics have changed. Whereas if you were to wear like a weighted hip vest, your mechanics wouldn't change as much. So you wouldn't get the soft tissue injuries. So it starts in puberty and feeds forward all the way through.
Oh, it makes so much sense. And then I look back and I go, yep, that's when my knee problem started.
Yeah.
And so if our coaches and PE teachers and anyone that's guiding our girls through their activity, if they don't understand this and start modifying for each child, you're just setting kids up for like a lifetime of injury.
Right. So I look at it as we don't have to segregate by sexes or puberty. What we need to do is we need to pull it right back. And like middle school or, end of primary school, we start doing more functional movements, like looking at how we're using TheraBands to increase glute activation for both boys and girls, looking on core and how we're actually moving through running and implementing weight over our hips and not overstriding. Because if we're teaching it to the boys and the girls, no one feels separated and put in a spotlight, but we're directly benefiting the girls by reteaching the basic mechanics as their bodies are changing. So people always are like, oh, as a phys ed teacher, it's too hard to do that. I'm like, no, if we bring it right down to the basic mechanics and basic functionality of strength, and then you add load, and some people will be able to add load faster than others, you're not separating out boys from girls. You're actually addressing all the issues that are happening in puberty, but really benefiting the girls because they're getting strong as they're developing these new motor patterns.
When is it a good time, or how early can kids start doing like weight training? You talked about your daughter deadlifting, and I'm like, oh, can you do that as as your body's growing like that?
Yeah, it's all about technique, right? So if we start learning how to move early, whatever. I mean, like we have some kids who have grown up in the gym, so they see their mom working out all the time. So when they're like 3 or 4, they're in there and they're using a small kettlebell or something like that. I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do, but they've grown up in that environment. Where if you have kids who are 5, 6, 7, 8 years old and they have an interest in getting stronger, we start looking at how they move. Let's throw in some planks. Let's throw in some air squats as our warm up. Let's throw in one-legged hop. Or maybe we do skipping down the field. It's still fun, but it's still working on all those dynamics and stuff. So once you learn how to move well, then you can add load. And it doesn't mean like heavy deadlifts. It could be just the bar and learning how to move properly with the bar. So then as you get stronger and older, you can add more load. It's never an issue to me about when you start. It's about how you move and move well. So when we hit puberty, if your mechanics are changing, we can see that in the lifting and the movement. And then we readjust and say, hey, wait, these things are changing. Let's alter the foot. Let's make sure we're not rounding the back. Let's work on these mechanics because it's all about the technique. And that way we're not pointing them out, but we're also progressing them through all these mechanical changes.
Yeah, and then as the body's strengthening to support like the proper technique, you're going to be protecting yourself as well.
Exactly.
Oh, if only I could go back.
I know.
I'm off after this to get a PRP injection in my knee, so it's all very confronting.
I love PRP. Yeah.
You do?
I do.
Oh, that's great. So for people who don't have to do this is called platelet-rich plasma. So they correct me if I'm wrong, take your blood out, they spin it, and then they shove it into your knee.
Yeah, they take out all your stem cells and shove it in to make it heal.
I'm
way
glad you
better
said
than
that.
cortisone or anything like that because it doesn't damage. Yeah, I'm right there with you. My
Okay,
right knee.
Great. Because I went to see an orthopedic surgeon who then, referred me on to this. But I made an unfortunate joke when I went in the door, and I think we got off on the wrong foot because I just didn't filter myself and I thought it was funny and he didn't agree. And then he was kind of quite dismissive after that. I'm like, is this how he is or was this my fault? But he was sort of, I wanted to just start with the PRP injection because I thought at least I'm just putting me back into me.
Yeah.
I know what I'm dealing with then. We'll see if that helps. And then if that doesn't work out, we'll go on from there. But he was kind of like, oh, well, it's not funded anymore. They're not really sure if it's really that effective.
Because you don't do it right in New Zealand. The real protocol is you have your first PRP injection, and then 2 weeks later, you have the second one. And then ideally 3 weeks after that, you have a third one because you have your sensitizing and then you have your activator. And then the last one that's 3 weeks later is the one that kind of holds you through for a year or more. But here it's like, just get one and it doesn't do much. You either may or may not have a response from it, but after two, you definitely do. And that's why we see people say, oh, it doesn't work. It's like, well, you have to follow the protocol correctly in order to get the benefit.
Okay. That's great. Well, I'm going to follow the protocol. I'm just going to suck it up and bite the bullet.
Yeah, well, you think about how much you spend on physio and ibuprofen and all that kind of stuff. It adds up.
Yeah.
So if you get PRP and you don't have to do that, that's sweet.
Yep. Okay. All right. It's been a year for sorting out my health, I tell you. I've done my ADHD diagnosis. I've got my glasses. I'm going to get my knee sorted. Look,
you're unstoppable.
I'm going to be I'm going to triple threat. Okay. So there are so many rapid changes to the body through puberty. And then you've got like sort of social aspects, complexity between peers, teens getting interested in relationships. So there's a lot more also to like focus on body and appearance at this stage. So it can be like a hotbed for disordered eating, body dysmorphia, all of that, as people are sort of trying to control the changes that are happening and then trying to fit in with beauty ideals, and it's a minefield. So
things,
yeah. How can we as parents or, role models or coaches encourage that body positivity and acceptance as they're moving through this stage?
We'll bring it back to how we're talking to our girls, right? Like I said at the beginning, I'm not a fan of diet culture. So none of the language that I have on social media or even in my own home talks about fat loss or talks about getting smaller or diets. I'm always promoting muscle-centric behaviors, like how strong are you? Are you eating to grow your muscles? Are you eating to grow your bones? Are you eating for your brain? Just really trying to connect the kinds of foods that we're eating with the strength and stress resilience. Because if someone is going through a high amount of stress, social or physical stress, we need to have that resilience. And unfortunately, kids aren't being taught that so much. So it's like, okay, well, if we're eating and we're improving our immune system and we're improving our neurotransmitters and we have a better mood and energy, then that leads forward into more stress resilience. So all the conversations we have about food and body is all about how strong we are and how resilient we are. Mm-hmm. And I feed that out to my friends and they feed that to their girls. And now the conversations are all about how strong and how fast and how I can think and how I'm sleeping. And so all the things that we want and that we hear as adults that we need to be doing. So just feed that into that positive scope. And if someone brings up fat loss or brings up a diet culture, I'm like, well, if you're eating protein, you're getting strong and you're moving, then your body responds and you don't have to worry about what this person over here is saying about being small. It's they're not doing all the things that you are doing. And it's a completely different situation. So it's just bringing it back to how are we being stress resilient? How are we growing our muscles? How are we growing our bones? And how are we thinking and perceiving that strength through our lives?
Mm-hmm. And nutritionally, what are some factors that kids going through puberty and growing, through adolescence should be focused on? Are we still on the protein train here? Are there other things that we need to think about?
Yeah, wide variety. Unfortunately, we see a lot of kids who are gravitating to what marketing has. So we see all the fast food, right? And it's hard to kind of get people to understand that a treat is a treat. It's not every day. We've had some pretty significant learnings where my daughter is like, oh, I want all those lollies. And I always am like, I want to know where the lollies are because I don't want them hanging out in your room. I don't want bugs. I want them here. But she's had a couple of episodes when she was younger where she ate too many and she felt awful and couldn't sleep. And then the next day she admitted that she had all these and she's like, I couldn't sleep. It's like, see, that's learning. So now she's like, I don't want them. But I don't think people do that. I'm like, you just let them and they learn. But we also have to put a cap on it. So it is, nothing is off limits. It's all in moderation. How does your body feel? What do you think you need? Do you really think you need that lolly or that cake? Yep, my tummy says so. Okay, well, you can have it. And then it's feeding in, well, how do you feel? How did that make you feel? Just trying to get that because we've all lost that. So from a nutrition standpoint, we're looking at a wide variety of opportunities of fresh whole foods. And if they're getting drawn into the marketing, it's like you don't put a precedence on it, but you also don't make it off limits, because if it is off limits, then of course that's where they're going to gravitate. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we have conversations. She doesn't like McDonald's. She doesn't like KFC. I don't think she's ever really eaten it, but she just is like, oh, it smells awful. I don't want to put that in my body. So having that mind-body connection, which I don't think it's taught very much. So those are the kinds of conversations that I really encourage parents to have, because then it also helps the parents, because the parents make that mind-body connection too. Because they're seeing us eat more of our whole foods, then they're like, oh, okay, well, maybe I should be doing that too. And again, it's the opportunities of eating, because we're growing, we're developing. We want really good brain growth development. So we need all of the fruit and veg and lean proteins for brain growth and the neuroplasticity. And that helps as we're seeing all the mood changes that are occurring, because we're having things like the amygdala that's growing, and that's responsible for fear and reaction to fear. So we have to think about, what are we eating to grow the person as they're developing, as well as what are we eating or giving them to fuel the activity that they're doing. And unfortunately, we see in this puberty time where girls are very aware of how their bodies are changing, and they don't want to eat in front of people, or they feel bad about eating, or they get told they shouldn't be eating something from someone in the diet culture. So just making sure that we have eating opportunities and lots of variety, so that they can eat something and they don't have to feel like they're doing something their friends don't want them to do.
Yeah.
Okay. What are the best lean proteins that we can all be eating?
A wide variety of plant and animal proteins, right? So we did this interview and someone asked us if salami and string cheese was good pre-workout food. And I was like, no, charcuterie is a treat and probably not pre-workout food. So, there are limits. Like if you're looking at lean proteins, we can look at whole eggs or egg whites, our low-fat yogurts or low-fat cottage cheeses, because they have a higher protein content than the full-fat ones. It's not because it's low-fat. It's just they have a higher protein content.
Did not know that.
Because if you're looking at volume, right, and they take some of the fat out, the protein content increases. So
you just got to watch out for added sugar, right? And
right. So I always tell people, go for the unflavored, and then you can flavor it yourself. I can get some vanilla paste and put that into your yogurt, and then all of a sudden you have vanilla yogurt. Or you can buy some frozen berries and put them in the microwave, mush them up, and then you have really good fruit puree you can stir into your yogurt and have strawberry yogurt. It takes a little bit of extra effort, but then you don't have all the added sugars and things. And then any lean meats, those are fine. Just want to look for the organic ones so you don't have nitrates and stuff. For looking at meat substitutes, the only two really would be tofu and tempeh, because all the other meat substitutes are so ultra processed. And people are like, oh, I'm getting for this meat substitute. And it's like, but that is not any better for you than like a protein Pop-Tart, because it's so ultra processed. So it's taking the eye of what's the least processed and what can I do to make up protein. And you can look at edamame and green peas and nuts and seeds and chicken for a salad, and kids will eat that too, because they're like, oh, yay, there's all different colors and textures in here. Sweet. So it is, again, the eye of the 80% rule. 80% of the time you're really paying attention, and then 20% is life.
And I think it's kind of shocking how much protein we really need.
Yeah.
So it's a lot, right? And I feel like you do have to be kind of intentional with your nutrition to be able to get the right amount of protein. Someone in my family actually went to a dietitian recently, and she got told about protein, and she was like, well, I have quite a lot of protein, for lunch. Sometimes I'll have some cheese and crackers, and then, I might, I might have some peanut butter on a rice cracker at some point. And then we were adding up the protein together, and it was like hardly anything. So is it 1 gram of protein per kg of body weight, or is it 1.5?
It's 1 gram per pound or 2 grams per kilo.
2 grams per kilo
that you need to have in a day?
Yeah. So this is why
to get in. It
I know.
Really is.
I know people always freak out. And I was just working on a piece with the journalist for the New York Times, because there's pushback from like general pop versus what we're looking at. So we have to remember that the RDI is based on really poor nitrogen studies, and the RDI for women are based on old sedentary men who have, quote, similar body composition. But we look at active tissue, women need more. Minimum is 1.6 grams per kilo per day. And ideally, we want to hit the 2 to 2.2 grams. If we're under a lot of stress and we're having lots of circadian rhythm shifts from strange hours of work, if we're working late or having to get up early, we want to make sure that we are including that higher end of protein. So we see under stress, our body will rapidly go through amino acids. And so if we're trying to preserve our lean mass, which includes bone and muscle, and we're also trying to maintain cognitive function and not put on body fat, protein is your friend. And when we're looking at kids who are growing and developing, and they're putting on all this extra tissue and all the systems are learning, we want a higher protein intake because it helps with all of that development.
Mm-hmm. Crikey, I've got to up my game,
chicken.
I think.
We've got to go thaw some chicken.
Yeah. So as our girls are approaching puberty and experiencing the hormonal changes or the beginning of menstruation, we all should be having open conversations at home about what's coming next. But what conversations would you like coaches to be having with their young athletes?
Yeah, this becomes a little bit sticky if we have male coaches. But if we are looking at every time someone shows up to a practice, there's a health check. Who's sick? Who didn't have sleep? Who's having issues? Who's started their period? So it just becomes part of that language. It works better for like 14, 15 on. So the early stage where girls are a little bit you could just put it in as who's feeling great, who's not. So if someone's not feeling great, then you can say, okay, is there something you want to tell me? What's going on? So there's an opportunity for those health checks. I think now we're seeing girls are more open to that conversation versus when we were growing up. So when we're looking at a male coach going, oh, how are you doing? Have you gotten your period? The girls will kind of laugh about it and they're like, no, it's fine. So they will acknowledge it. But one of the things that people need to realize is when you first start getting your period, it's very irregular. It's not on a clock like it is when you get into your later years and your reproductive years. It can come once and then 6 months later it comes again, or it comes really close together because your body's trying to learn its rhythm. The only issue is if it's really super heavy and super, super crampy, this is when we need to really say, okay, well, it could be a clinical issue. So if a girl is missing practice on a regular basis every few weeks or, once a month, then you might want to have a little bit of a conversation either with her friends or her parents and say, hey, what's going on here? Because if we catch it early, then we don't have to have a girl who thinks that it's normal to miss days of school or something because of period and period crampings. It shouldn't interfere with normal life. So that's something that is put on coaches, but also put on parents. So if we can have those normal conversations as a health check, because it is a check of how our endocrine system is going, how stress resilient we are, how we're responding to the environment, and how we are having nutritional balance between our growing bodies and our training bodies.
Okay, so question on heavy periods and heavy cramps. In my day, I was thinking back, I was at boarding school, just remembering all those girls who just cramped so bad that they threw up. I had a very, very heavy period and then was just put on anti-inflammatories for it. So none of the options really were meeting anyone's needs, and then I go, well, that was just going to a GP and it was just kind of like muted, Where do you recommend people go to really look closely at a developing girl's menstrual cycle and hormones?
So a lot of the younger GPs now are upskilled. We can also look at going to an endocrinologist or asking for a referral to a sports doc because more and more of that education is coming out, especially as we start looking at the research of low energy availability and relative energy deficiency in sport that can start early. So the menstrual cycle and menstruation has become quite the precedence in understanding these. If you're feeling very uncomfortable about having those conversations, or you're like, I live in the Wop Wops out in Hinuera and there is no GP that would understand it, you can go to Boston Children's Hospital Female Athlete Program website, and it has a lot of information on that website. It's part of the WUSI conglomerate that's in the States and the UK that's really pushing women's health and female athlete health, because anti-inflammatories is not the answer. We can look at so many different other options. Could be a nutritional thing. We're looking at increasing anti-inflammatory foods and supplements before the period starts. We could look at using tranexamic acid to cause a little bit of blood clotting, which reduces the flow. And in older teen girls, we can look at using an IUD, which really does help minimize the growth of the uterine lining and stop cramps. So there's lots of different options, but the first step is understanding that heavy bleeding and really severe cramping is not normal.
Yeah, that's great. And so what is a starting point for our men to get more comfortable having these conversations and, sort of smash that taboo around talking about periods and hormones and menstrual cycles?
Just talk about it. Right?
Yeah.
Like now it's a dad will say, because there are a lot of single dads who are navigating this too, right? So if they have a period kit, like you can go and you can buy period kits. Ruby Red, I think, is one. And it comes as a first period box where it has different tampons and pads and period undies and stuff. So just having that, you can say, hey, I know that you're going through puberty. Here's this. And you might have a little bit of giggle, but then it opens up that conversation. For coaches who like never talk about it. And it's like, okay, but you want the best health for your girls. You can just kind of stand around and listen to the girls talking. And you can hear them talking about it, or you can broach it as, and everyone's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but more you normalize it and the more you talk about it, the more it just becomes normal. So we put these things in a taboo and say, oh, dads shouldn't talk about it. Male coaches shouldn't talk about it. I'm like, but why? Like if it's a dad, the dad has a girl, the girl is part of his life. He needs to understand that if you're a coach who's coaching young girls, it's part of their life and how it interacts with how they feel on the field or in training. So you want to know that as a coach. None of it's off limits. What makes it off limits is when you have that stigma around it, or the girl is not comfortable talking to you, but can talk to her friends about it. As long as someone is talking about it and you're normalizing it, then it opens it up and feeds forward to removing that taboo that been working for 20 plus years to remove.
Yeah. And I think even just like in your own home, no matter how old your children are, like you can talk about having your period, and it doesn't have to, and it doesn't have to be this big moment of like, I'm going to discuss a period with you now. It can just be talking about the fact that you have it and it's gone away and, oh, my period's due tomorrow or whatever. I actually read a article a while ago talking about how when children grow up, because there was like, oh, poos, yucky, or this, yucky, and how even just reframing, talking about something like that as not being yucky, just being like, it's just poo. Everyone goes to the toilet. Like everyone does that. It's fine. It's just a normal part of your body. And then that starts the conversation there, is that these are just things that our body do. You don't have to be like, oh, yuck, oh, gross. That's just life.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah.
Even worms poo. Come on.
Yeah, it's fine. Everyone does. It's all part of it.
Part of it.
There's also a great book, and I'm just thinking about like single dads and stuff. And it's helpful just to have like books around that kids can access as well if they don't feel comfortable talking to you or you want to open a conversation. I think it's called Welcome to Your Period by Yumi Steins, and I'll put the link in the show notes. So that's like handy just to have these things floating around, and always have a stock of like tampons or liners or period undies or whatever, so it's there. And also like when you can relate the hormone cycle back to how they might be feeling on the sports field or as they're training or performance, and checking in on those levels in relation to how it might affect them doing something that they enjoy. Sometimes that perhaps that's a more approachable way to get into it.
Yeah. The caveat there is we don't want people to think that there is any negative day in the menstrual cycle to perform. Mm-hmm. We can have days where we feel flat. So in training, it's fine. Like, that you feel a little bit flat. You might not be sprinting as fast, and that's fine. Every individual has their days. But if, you have a tournament on the weekend and it comes on the few days that you feel absolutely flat, psychologically, we shouldn't say, oh, well, you're going to be flat, you're not going to perform well. It's okay. Well, now we want to make sure that you eat well and you hydrate well so that you can fly. Yeah. So we have to make that differentiation. But I always tell girls, we would just want to track. So you can have it in your little private notebook. You can have it as an app if you want, but you want to know how you slept and how you feel in relation to where you are in your menstrual cycle. Because not only will that give you insight for training from sports performance, but it also gives you insight on how you can interact with the world, Right.
Yeah.
Because if I know like the few days before my period, I feel bulletproof. So I'm like really aggressive and I want to get into work. But a few days before that, where I'm like, F everyone. I don't want to talk to anybody. I want to hide. And sometimes it comes out with my child. And I'm like, well, it's about a week before my period. She's like, okay, I got it.
Yeah, say no more. Do you recommend any apps for tracking cycles?
It's up to the individual. The one thing that it comes down to is, are you tracking just for yourself or are you looking for insights? Because there is a good upsurge of femtech that will use AI specific to your own data to then be able to feed back what you have written and logged, which can be beneficial in some regards. But if you're logging in a negative comment or you're logging negativity, then it feeds back to you in negativity.
Yeah.
So I always am like, okay, let's be really conscious of why we're trying to log or what we're trying to use. Bring it really right back to basics, where we might go to a fertility app that doesn't have negative language. So we might look at Hello Clue or Flow, where it's going all the positive things that lead up to ovulation and after ovulation, because there are some out there that are more sports oriented or more general pop oriented that feedback with negative language.
Yeah. Now, it can be hard for teens to focus on what impact dropping out of sports and physical activity can have on their physiology down the line, because we all know children are not, they're not supposed to be forward thinkers. It's just not how they're wired.
Doesn't happen.
No,
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen, especially if they've been put off or have greater demands at school or more excited by social diversion. So how can we keep our girls excited about staying active? Because you mentioned bringing back in more of a fun aspect, but is there anything else that we can do at home as parents?
So there's a lot of research that's coming out about screen time and social media and mood disorder and poor sleep and depression.
Mm-hmm.
So putting into play for everyone in the house to park the phones when you first come in and you're not looking at them after a certain time, having more conversation and engagement, all of that is going to feed forward to better sleep. So if we have better sleep, we have better mood. If we have better mood, then we can instigate, well, you know what? If we're active, then we can have that better mood all the time. So it doesn't have to be like running every day, because that makes people hate running, like cross country in the schools. I'm like, why are you doing that? Because there's so many kids who aren't natural runners and they hate it. And then they think that that's what physical activity is about.
It's kind of a weird thing when you think about it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's very like, who's the best? Who's the best?
Yeah.
It just feels a bit.
And you see it change.
Yeah.
I can watch it from primary school. The girls are beating the boys. And then you get to middle school and all the girls are like, why am I doing this? I don't want to do this, except for the ones that run for sport. So I'm like, well, why don't we make it more fun and have like, I don't know, hip hop dance lessons or something like that. I don't know, something that's different, that's physically active, so that kids learn that physical activity is not necessarily about running and putting in the hard yards, because it doesn't have to hurt. It doesn't have to be hard all the time. It's just moving. So I have a friend who lives at the very top of a massive hill in Wellington. And when his kids act up, he's like, okay, you have two options here. You can either sit in the doorway of your room with the door open and no screens and nothing. You sit there for 2 hours and just contemplate on what you did. Or I can drop you at the bottom of the hill and you can walk home. It's always say, I'm going to walk home. Doesn't matter what it is. And it's about 3.5K up to the top to where they live. But then they get home and they've had the physical activity. Their mood is better. They didn't have to sit in a doorway for 2 hours. The parents have had a break. Everyone's had a break and things are great. So it's just being able to implement a little bit of physical activity. Like I said, it doesn't have to say we're going for a run today. We're going to go do this training workout. It's like, you know what? We live 3 blocks from New World and we need some eggs. Let's walk down. Like just finding ways to put a little bit of activity, incidental activity. And that's the movement that we're worried about. It's not actually the training. So then we see how that movement orientation feeds into better body composition, better mood, better awareness of how they're interacting and how their bodies are interacting. So then that feeds forward to a positive engagement with physical activity. I guess they're stealth moves, but they're not really, if you think about it.
Yeah.
That's great. And quite often I try and find movies that excite my kids about their sports or, having great adventures out into the world. So my daughter's a climber, and I find it really hard to find movies and documentaries that celebrate female climbers' successes. And, I'm just using that as an example, but do you have like movie and documentary recommendations that we could watch with our kids, during our family time that might be motivating for them to keep pursuing their sports and keep pursuing activity?
Yeah, I really like the movie Girls Can't Surf. And you don't have to be a surfer for it, but it just shows the stigma that these women had to go through and how they fought and how they stood up. And then at the end, they end up with the equality. So that's a good one. I mean, I like Bend It Like Beckham, because that's another one where you're having a girl who's very, has this conversation like, do I do what my parents want, or do I pursue football? And it makes me feel good. So there's those kinds of like movies around. If we talk about documentaries, the Banff Film Festival, they have it on their website that has a lot of good adventure ones that are really female focused now. And it doesn't have to be sports specific to our girls. It's just about the empowerment of movement that I like. So I'm always looking out for those film fests, and you can stream them off their website, and they're short ones. So you can go, okay, look, we'll stream this on the TV, or we'll cast it to the TV and we'll watch it together. And it's only 15 minutes. You got 15 minutes, hang out with me, right? So it doesn't have to be a full long one. But
that's a great suggestion, because quite often, we might be getting to kind of that relaxy time together later after dinner. And I'm thinking, I want you to also go to bed quite soon. At this age, like they're 10 and 12, where it's kind of hard to find stuff that we're all going to enjoy, like they can't have stuff that's like too grown up, but then like I've had enough of the animated things. So they're really good suggestions, and we'll put the links in the show notes. Yeah.
Now, off the topic of adolescence for a minute, Stacey, I've had so many people send me the clip of you talking about ice baths for women.
Oh, yes.
And it's I mean, I like an ice bath, but I'm not constantly in one. I was like, God, am I like, everyone's like, hey, make sure you know.
Oh my God, I brought out the haters. I was like, of everything I've ever said in a podcast, it's crazy.
Oh, yeah, people just love to complain about things. But can you tell us out here who are avid ice bathers, not that I am, but I dabble, how to get the best benefit from contrast therapy with saunas and ice baths as a woman? Because as we are learning from you now, it's different for women and for men, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we have different basic thermoregulatory responses. So when women first get in the cold, we vasoconstrict, and any woman who has Raynaud's will tell you how bad that is. And if we get into an ice bath, so 0 to 4 degrees, women's vasoconstriction is so incredibly strong and trying to hold heat, we don't actually start the shivering, and we need the shivering for metabolic heat. When we look at the original research, all the original research on cold was 15 to 18 degrees. The ice stuff started coming with cold water swimming and Wim Hof. No real research on it. So when we start looking at the little bit of research that's there, we see that men, because they have different thermoregulatory mechanisms than women, and they start shivering later because they have more metabolic heat production before they start shivering, they can do fine in ice, and they start getting the neuroendocrine and metabolic changes that we want with ice. For women, it's 15 degrees. Because we start shivering at a higher temperature, and that's what we're after. Because when we start having the shock around 15 degrees, it's cold enough to instigate the neurochemical and metabolic and all the things that we want from ice, but not from ice. We don't have to be as cold. It's not a severe shock. So we don't get what we call a vagal response. We don't have all of a sudden a plummet of the heart rate, which people think is great. It's parasympathetic, but no, it's a threat to the body. Incredible amount of stress. 15, perfect. So if you really want to graduate down to ice, just know that it's more of an actuation where you're trying to acclimatize to cold water swimming, but it doesn't give you any more of the benefits that we see in the literature. So if you're akin to ice, don't go ice, go cold. Cold is fine.
That's great to know. And so 15 degrees, that's Celsius.
Yes.
And that's a cold shower? That would be around 15?
Yeah, or any of the oceans around New Zealand at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. That's all we have to do. Oh, that's
It's
amazing.
a lot more
Yeah.
palatable. It'll be interesting because I go to a studio where we do contrast therapy, and there's an ice bath in the women's changing rooms and in the men's changing rooms. So you go out of the sauna and you go into each one. I wonder if they will get to the point where they go, okay, we're going to adjust them differently because at the moment they're like, it's between 5 and 7 degrees in the women's one, and we're all doing that. But then, like, are they going to get to the point? And I can imagine if they go, hey, we've adjusted these for the maximum benefit for each of you guys, I can imagine they get a lot of pushback.
Maybe they will. But then I also ask about contrast therapy, because the research behind contrast therapy isn't there either. It's like, why are we doing contrast therapy? We take the idea from the Finnish sauna, which is, I think, how it originated, where you're in the sauna and then you go for a cold plunge. It's to then be able to get back in the sauna. It's not because the contrast is doing something for your body of a shock to a shock. We see if you want to optimize both of them, you want to do them separately. You don't want to do contrast and cold right after training because it inhibits some of your adaptations. You want to do heat after training, sure, because it extends the work that your body has done in exercise and you start getting longer adaptations. If you're looking for sauna for health benefits, you can either do it right after training or some other time for 10 to 30 minutes, and you start getting heat shock proteins and metabolic control and all of those things. But if you're going contrast, hot, cold, why are you doing it? It's not for recovery. It doesn't work for recovery. Are you looking for shock and a stress resilience standpoint? Do one or the other, but not contrast.
That's really good to know. Yeah, because then I guess you're just sort of diluting the benefits of both, really, aren't you?
Exactly.
Right. And so for those that, for this is new, what are the main benefits that we want to be getting from the sauna or the ice bath?
Yeah. So if we're looking at what environmental stress does, we as a society have gotten so used to living and operating in 20 to 22 degrees Celsius, right? Our houses and stuff are all insulated for the most part, or maybe we have a heat pump or fire. So we're always in some kind of comfort. So we look at environmental stress to create a response within the body that's going to make it more stress resilient. Both cold and hot can do something similar. If we're looking at improving blood glucose control, we're looking at improving our blood pressure, we're looking at improving our cardiovascular output. So that means our heart rate and how that works. We want to go for heat, right? Because we look at heat and what happens when you walk into a hot environment, not an infrared sauna, but a true Finnish sauna. You have an immediate response from the skin, and the skin's response is to open up, to bring the blood to the skin, to release heat into the environment. But when you're in a 60 to 80 degree sauna, you actually are absorbing heat. So then the body's like, I need to sweat. I need to start cooling off. And our core temperature goes up. And all of those induce a lot of feedback to the cardiovascular system, where it's like, okay, now I need to increase the total amount of water that's in my blood, and I need to increase the amount of red cells that are in my blood so that I can carry oxygen to the tissues. I also need to make sure that I don't have any damaged cells circulating as I'm increasing all of this. So I'm going to increase heat shock proteins that then feed forward to autophagy. And of course, we need to protect the brain. So now we have better brain metabolism and the ability to cool the brain so that we don't go into cardiac failure or anything like that. So all of those things happen in the heat. When we look at cold, we're having another severe stress response, but instead of having a heat absorption, we're having the ability to hold the heat and try to generate more heat. So this is where people are like, oh, well, for women, we get some additional brown fat, but that's a nuance. Like there's not enough ability to build brown fat to actually make a metabolic change. So we want to take that off the table. What we do want to look at is when we get into cold and it's so cold and the body is shrinking its core to shell gradient. So that means that you have more conservation of our core heat, and our body is trying to understand that. So it increases its ability to use glucose. So we start to get better blood glucose control. It's also teaching the body to bring more fatty acids into the muscle so that we can generate more fuel for the muscle to shiver. So we start having better metabolic flexibility from that. We also see that we have such that severe stress that we invoke a parasympathetic response where you start to relax because your body's under such stress. It's trying to slow heart rate, it's trying to slow the breathing rate, and that's all on the autonomic nervous system or the rest and digest. So that can feed forward to better sleep. We also see better neurotransmitter production because, again, it is stress to the brain because now we're getting too cold of blood going to the brain. So they each separately do something that maximize aging well and not getting old. Because we don't stress our body in daily life with all of the automated stuff that we're doing. So we look to environmental stress. But when we come down to sex differences, we see that there are sex differences in the way that we thermoregulate and the way that women are more metabolically flexible and the way that we carry our body fat and our muscle mass. So we have to be very cognizant of how we use the cold, but everybody responds to the heat.
Okay, interesting. I've also got a couple of little questions on terminology. One, what's a heat shock protein? And two, what's autophagy?
Okay, so heat shock protein, we have little messengers in our body. So every time we have any kind of cellular response, it all has to do with a protein. So that means like on our cells, we have a locking key, right? So if we think about insulin being the key that unlocks the cell to pull glucose in, if we have a GLUT4 protein, it doesn't need a key. It just opens up the cell. So heat shock proteins are messengers that are released when we're under severe heat stress. So these are little protein signals that are released from the cells and go out and say, okay, well, we need to make sure that all the cellular debris isn't here because that could cause some issues when we're trying to heal. So then it causes signals for those little cellular debris to be uptaken into other parts of the body to be broken down for their parts. So that's called autophagy, where we're cleaning up all the cellular debris so that we can use the amino acids and some of the other parts of those cells for other functions in the body. So it's the body's being very efficient. And part of the aging process is too much oxidation. So that means too many free radicals and too many of these particles floating around. So part of using environmental stress is to teach the body, no, we want to uptake all these particles and reuse them, recycle them. So the body's being very clean and green by going, I'm going to recycle these for the sum of its parts.
Okay. So it's like having a robot vacuum cleaner.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Exactly. That's great. Okay.
Perfect.
So lastly,
with the big dog barking at it to hurry up.
Yeah, good. Good. If there are three things that we could focus on doing every day in terms of overall foundational health and longevity, what would be your top tips for meeting those health and wellness needs?
Don't look at it as short term, because we all tend to get into, oh, I want to be like this in 3 months. No, that doesn't work. We want to look at what we're doing that's going to help us in 6 months, in a year, 5 years, 10 years down the track. So longer term goal. Don't ever ask me what a 5-year plan is for me because I don't have one. But, so I don't want people to think, oh, I have to have a plan. But it's just small incremental steps. And in that, I say, okay, there's actually 4 pillars that we want to investigate. We want to have the mindfulness and the sociocultural, like how we're interacting. We're going to have the physical movement, the nutrition, and sleep. So one of those 4 we want to pick. That's our big one that we want to work on. So if it's sleep, then we look, okay, well, I know that if I put screens down and I'm not watching screens 2 hours before bed and I have a cool room and I'm doing all the sleep hygiene things, I'm going to get a better sleep. Let's work on that for 3 weeks. Because if we have better sleep, then we have better metabolic control. We have better ability to withstand the stressors that happen in the day. And then we have the ability to then change something else. So then we can look at implementing physical activity, or we can look at implementing one small thing in nutrition. Maybe it's having protein when we first get up, or maybe we make sure that we don't do fasted training. So it's just one small thing that we change, and that'll take time, right? So it might be one nutritional thing that we change over the course of 3 weeks, and then another one that we change over the course of 3 weeks. And then you start implementing some physical activity. So for the mindfulness, this is the easiest one that I want people to implement, is as women, we tend to put everyone first. And we feel guilty if we take time for ourselves. But if we just take 10 minutes in the morning or 10 minutes some point in the day and say, I'm owning this 10 minutes. And in this 10 minutes, maybe you're doing a short sprint session, or maybe you are just sitting down and acknowledging the breeze that's blowing on you and If we're lucky enough to have sunny days, the sun that's warming us, right? So we can take that 10 minutes and own that and understand those feelings. So then when we get into a stressful point in the day, we can bring ourselves back to those 10 minutes and understand what it feels like to own the situation. So that's the mindfulness and the sociocultural part where we own ourselves and our situation. And it's kind of a page out of Mel Robbins' Let Them, where we are owning our situation and we're not letting people push us around. Because it brings us back to being better parents. Because if we start to blow up at our kids, we can just take a step back and go, okay, breeze on my face. How did I feel when I was just there? So that's the one thing that I always have people start with. And then you can start looking at the sleep, the physical activity, and the nutrition.
Mm-hmm. And then usually when you start with one, you want to continue, right? Because you're feeling these positive changes in your body and in your life. It's like, oh, what would happen if I tried this next one and the next one, the next one? You feel better and better and better. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Stacey, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We really appreciate it. And all the knowledge that you have shared, our listeners are going to get so much out of it.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, guys. And you know what? I'm so happy to be on a Kiwi homegrown podcast.
Yeah, well, we're a grassroots little pod.
That's okay.
So
maybe not for long.
Exactly.
So great. There's so many valuable takeaways in there, you know, for us and for our kids. And yeah, it's really exciting. So anything we've talked about that requires a link, I'm going to make sure that is there. And yeah, that was so exciting. We loved having you and really appreciate your time and your knowledge.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to this episode of Untidy. If you enjoyed it, we'd love your support to keep making the show. The best thing you can do to help is subscribe by hitting follow in your podcast app and leaving us a little 5-star review. You can also now watch and subscribe on YouTube and check out how these millennials are keeping up with the cool kids on TikTok and the gram. Lastly, please share this podcast with your mates. It means that we can keep building this supportive community, keep giving you untidy episodes, and just keep doing what we love to do.
Don't forget to check out mybigmoments.com for kids' books that make your tricky job of parenting a whole lot easier. Untidy listeners get a discount at checkout, so just pop in Untidy for 10% off your order. Lastly, we would like to thank all of the good people who make this podcast possible. Flicker Williams and Joe Rocker at My Big Moments for the beautiful artwork and design, Maxine London Creative for editing this episode, and Lana Byrne for creating our social content. And to you, our listeners, Araha nui, take care. We'll see you soon.